Welcome, everyone, to a fun conversation. Jeffrey, I've been having a fun conversation before we even started this recording. We're exploring the upcoming relationship, and actually, it's already in process of Eris and Chiron. And Eris is the goddess of chaos and discord, and Chiron is the shamanic healer, helping us to heal our wounds so they become our medicine, and we're no longer at the effect of them, but they become the medicine that we carry. And so these two coming together is truly an amazing thing that's happening. And if we think about it, Eris has a 500 and if you round it up, 60-year cycle um, for her to go through all the parts of the sky in relationship to the earth and all of that. She's been in Aries since 1922, and she stays in Aries until 2048. Chiron's in Aries for about 8 years. So they've actually met in Aries prior, 1971, I think was the last time they met in
Yeah.
Aries. And so they've met in Aries, and then they're meeting in Aries this time. And then I don't think they get to meet in Aries before Eris moves out of Aries in 2048. But so this is like the big hurrah here. And so we decided that we wanted to I think we're going to do a series of these videos because this is so significant and so important. And we just want to begin by introducing what is happening right now and also how it's relating to the United States chart Chiron return that we have been in. And of course, in 1971, I think it was around 13 degrees Aries where they met. And so they weren't as close. They're really close now to the US declaration chart happening. And also the fact that Chiron is still in square to the USA Mercury at 24 Cancer. And so Chiron's and Eris are squaring that this whole year as well. So we're going to be exploring so much here around all of this. And I just wanted to say, great to do this with you, Jeffrey. And
Yeah, it's wonderful, Cayelin. I'm really glad that we're able to have this discussion and share our ideas about this. I think, as we all know, the United States has been going through all of these various processes with the Pluto return and the Chiron return, and there's been a lot of discussion of that. And we might think of them as more like in the rearview mirror. However, there's still all of this fallout from it. Um, and furthermore, the thing that you just mentioned, I mean, we have to be aware that with Chiron and Eris coming together, that's for the whole planet. It's just that it's particularly affecting the United States and in those two archetypal ways that you're discussing. And I think, for at least some of the people who will be viewing this on my channel, it is important to remind people that we're talking about the planets as they're moving in the sky as a way to discern how these archetypes, which are these structures within the human psyche, how those archetypes are interacting. And we would like to hope that as they interact, they're also evolving. So, the Chiron of that the United States experienced, how we as a nation experienced in the moment of declaring our independence from Great Britain, has evolved and is different, perhaps, than what it is today, and yet it's going to resonate back to that original thing. And one of the ways that we understand that or describe that with astrology has to do with another cycle or vibration in the astronomical movements, because we discern all of these movements and then we discover how does that actually affect who we are and the resonance between a particular archetype. Like in the case of Chiron, that wound that drives us towards more compassion and a kind of specialized knowledge, as you pointed out, to be more of the healer in sharing what has emerged from that, from that kind of thing that wasn't quite right within us, and then we evolve with it. And they're no longer identifying with the wound, but seeing the medicine of it. So the way we describe that is that at that time, the way it shows up is that for between the beginning of the Declaration in 1776 and now, with virtually 250 years have passed, that that we can see that in the sky as an element of the 26,000 year cycle. And so what it tells us is how much the life of a country, a person, or whatever. Now, obviously, a person isn't going to live 250 years, but yet. But in the life of the country, how much it may have evolved with respect to that much longer, broader 26,000 year cycle, which relates to the precession of all of the ages through as the seasons shift through the background stars. So when we look at it that way, the the United States Chiron at 20 degrees of Aries, Chiron had reached that for its third time on February 18th. But in terms of when it will reach that same point with respect to the background stars, or that chunk of time that tells us how much we have evolved, desorbed, devolved, whatever, how much we've changed in 250 years. It's that chunk of time between February 18th and April 22nd. This is a critical time in terms of our understanding of Chiron. But obviously, it expands way beyond that because it's going to happen you just mentioned, Cayelin, that it's the last one is
It comes
around.
back to that point on April 22nd. Then it's going to go retrograde, comes back to that point again on November 16th
Yeah,
of 2025. And then on February 17th of 2026, it comes back to that point again, moving beyond the 1 degree on March 11th of 2026. So we're in a window that really, as you're describing, Jeffrey, started in February when that was the last Chiron conjunction to the natal Chiron based on the degrees that we look at that chart. And now we're looking at it based on the precessional cycle and where Chiron was actually in the sky, and then how the is returning to these points. Chiron is returning to that point, which is continuing to activate the Chiron return. And I just love that because it didn't feel like it was over.
right.
On return was over. And so this is just like, oh, and then I was thinking, oh, Chiron squaring Mercury on the USA chart. So it's still, it's definitely not over. But and then we can add in Eris to this whole
Right.
story as well. And so as the goddess of discord and chaos being what creates something new. And so I'm just going to invite you to share that story of Eris. And then also there was something else you shared about because she wasn't invited to the party, how she's been pushed out. So I'd love for you to
Sure.
share about.
Well, so the most well-known story of Eris, the goddess of chaos and discord, is where there was a wedding, and I'm not going to remember all of this right now because we're going to give it a little bit of a shorthand. But they all of the it was a big deal, and the goddesses were all there, and Eris wasn't invited because, who wants chaos at your chaos or discord at a wedding, right? And then so she presents this uh, she gets annoyed with this and presents the golden apple to the goddesses, and okay, this can go to the fairest of them all. And that for
Places it
those
on the table like where they can't miss it. So with a sign that says this is for the fairest one of all.
Right. So they start to go into this competition of like who is the fairest, and then it goes into this whole other whole other thing that triggers the Trojan War. I'm really going to give this more of a shorthand because the
Okay,
idea
I'm just going to say quickly, Zeus
quick.
does not be part of it. He hands it over to a guy named Paris, who's from Troy, to pick who's going to be the one.
Who's
And the
going to
goddesses all
decide?
bribe him, and he picks the one that gets him into the Trojan War. So he picks the goddess that gets him into the Trojan
There
War.
you go.
So
There you go.
creating all kinds of chaos and discord as a result. Yeah.
Right. But if we look at this more of metaphorically, because all of these stories, whether they come from the Greek or any other culture, they're allegories. But particularly with these Greek stories that we draw in this case, we're talking about Eris, they're intended. They probably had multiple intentions, and they were firstly, they're drawn from the culture at the time. But when we look at them more from an archetypal or Jungian perspective, depth psychology perspective, they're allegories. They're stories that are supposed to help us to understand, to kind of wrap our minds around things that are part of our human experience. And so that's where we can kind of separate it from a story or even from the gender that it's the notion that it's a gender, a goddess or whatever. It's fine if we do, but it's the notion that we're within us as human beings, and maybe as us as individuals, is there strife or discord that leads to chaos, but that ultimately out of that chaos, something new can emerge. Because in that respect, the allegory is basically was kind of pointing out some of the hypocrisy and some of the ways that the as you involve the other male aspects with respect to the goddesses, etc., that aren't functioning in a way that allows for the inclusion of everybody, the inclusion or the movement. I guess maybe to get more to the point is um, Eris may create all of this, and it supposedly led to the Trojan War and was the last to leave the battlefields because it was, there's that notion of those that do come into conflict don't, they're not going to give up their point, their position. But there was another kind of Eris that was described by the Greeks as well that had more to do with competition, say between city-states, that drove them more towards uh, a betterment than conflict. And I think therein might be some of the lessons that we can learn from Eris. But I find it interesting because I started learning astronomy as a young boy and got kind of dragged into astrology. I've told people this before, but it was not until my Saturn return and a woman that I was interested in said, "Hey, you should look into this." And I was like, you know, I'm an astronomer, and like I don't believe in that until it was like, oh my God, is this ever accurate? And but because of that, that's a fascination of mine. And one of the things that happened with the discovery around the discovery of Eris is we got better and better instrumentation and we got better understandings of how planets formed. Um, the discovery of Eris with this 560 year, 559, 60, whatever I've seen different numbers for it. Um, Orbital period, it's well beyond Pluto. Well, it's about the same size as Pluto. It's a little bit more dense. So here it is, um, a significant planet, and they had to come up with a different model for, well, what is a planet? Meanwhile, they've been discovering a whole lot of other things. So something called the Nice model emerged. And in that, the understanding of the formations of the planets, to kind of give it just a short version, there were five gas giants initially, and they were closer to the sun. And as things developed, that movement, they tended to migrate outwards. And initially, Neptune was closer to the sun than Uranus. But Neptune migrated out past Uranus. And in the process, it was one of the major influences for organizing all of the other icy bodies, like Pluto and and to some degree Eris. But with Pluto, for example, that was the next body out there that we discovered. It's in what they call an orbital resonance. It's in a 2 to 3 orbital resonance. For every 2 cycles of Pluto, there's 3 cycles of Neptune. So there's this kind of gravitational connection. And if we think metaphorically again, Neptune being the collective unconscious, that place with which all of these different possibilities um, reside, these other states of consciousness out of which things can uh, uh, um, emerge. Pluto is a process that is contained within that, the idea of death, rebirth. And everything in the Kuiper belt is like that. But out beyond that is what they call the scatter disk. These are bodies that are still being scattered. They're still being influenced by these gravitational tugs and pulls. So again, thinking about it from the standpoint of an archetype, it still comes in, and over millions of years, Eris is out in the scatter disk. So in a sense, it was ejected. Pluto was incorporated to 2 to 3 resonance. Everything in the scatter disk is still moving and changing and shifting. So there's this kind of idea that Eris, the uninvited guest, and in its physical reality is, it's outside that organized the organization of the inner solar system. So it is literally in an area of chaos. And
I love this. I just want to add something here because uh, if we think about Eris when she was discovered in 2005, she created all this chaos around, oh, now Pluto's not a planet, or they're the same size, but it's further out. And it was like, what do we do with this? So they decided to demote Pluto to a dwarf planet and promote Eris to a dwarf planet, call her a planet, not just some asteroid or something out there. So so in a way, it was kind of like an equalizing of those, Pluto and Eris in a way. But so now we don't consider ourselves as having 9 planets in our solar system, but most astrologers still use Pluto as a planet. And then would we promote Eris to being a planet? And with everything that's going on right now, she is such a major player, and that she's reminding us that it's okay. Chaos, discord, all these things are part of what challenge us. And if it's not challenging us, it's not changing us. So if we're going to be changed, we need to be challenged, and then we can grow and evolve. And so that is a lot of what Eris is bringing to us at this time. And yeah, so she's only been in our awareness for 20 years.
yeah, and I think that's it is remarkable. And the idea was that yes, it did sort of equalize it. They are both considered dwarf planets, but in different areas of the solar system, because the Pluto is in an area that is more organized, and Eris is outside that. But it is considered a dwarf planet, and so they had criteria around that. And I think the thing that you're suggesting was that, well, yeah, they had to figure it out as they discovered more and more bodies, what really constitutes a planet, and based on the model that they see that explains a lot, they had to create these different categories. But that's the whole idea about, well, Eris, um, suggesting that Eris, that energy restructures things, brings it into chaos. As you said, it might bring it into what appears to be chaos, and it restructures things. But we know it's powerful. We know Pluto is powerful. Anybody who's had a Pluto transit, we know it's powerful. But in a sense, it's also, it has nothing to do with its size, but maybe more to do with all of its relationship and the fact that it is such a close relationship to Neptune in particular, that it is in this tight resonance with Neptune. So it's part of our collective unconscious has to go through a death rebirth process, a transformational process.
I just have to add something here because
Sure.
Neptune yesterday, March 30th, we're recording this on March 31st, just went into Aries, where Eris has been since 1922 and will be till 2048. And at some point, they're going to connect with each other
Right.
by sign and degree. And so, whoa, that fact that that's happening, and of course Saturn's going to go into Aries, and and Saturn will connect a little sooner than Neptune, but anyway, so Eris is really important right now because she is in Aries, has been for such a long time, and because Chiron is in Aries and they're coming together. And this is something that hasn't happened since the early 70s. It's been over 50 years since they came together, and in Aries.
Hmm.
So here we are at this just truly remarkable, amazing opportunity to expand our awareness and invite in the chaos so we can be changed, so we can experience the change instead of rejecting it and saying, you're not invited. We don't want you here. We invite that to come in because that is part of us anyway, and it's happening anyway because we can see it happening around the planet where
Right.
the chaos is happening. And so we're not going to stop it. They weren't able to stop it by not inviting Eris to the party. They they wound up in a war that lasted 13 years or some crazy thing.
Yeah, some
So
crazy.
we can't reject it. If we're rejecting it, we're going to just make it bigger and
Right.
more in our awareness. So this is such an amazing time to be willing to invite what is happening to be present and to be present with it.
Yeah, so this suggests a whole bunch of things. And like you said, we may explore these in future videos, but it suggests the questions that we might ask ourselves. I mean, I am particularly interested in what's going on in the world, what's going on in the United States. I mean, I partly got into this with my whole eclipse journey, which is another story. But the if we start asking that within ourselves, where is the strife within ourselves or the discord within ourselves? What would it look like to invite? I don't, I mean, can you even imagine it? What would it look like to invite chaos, you know, to the party? We don't even want to imagine that. And that's sort of reflective of the whole idea. Well, we don't even want to contain that in our, this notion that it's outside of the organized system or the bounds of the solar system in the scatter disk. That is
And
a real,
The Greeks had a saying that it was out of chaos comes the world, and she's the goddess of chaos. So it was from her that the world was birthed out of this chaotic energy. And so sometimes that chaos needs to come back to create a new birth, a new way for us to be. And if we're willing to not reject it,
right.
to accept it and accept what's going on in some way that it's like, okay, how do we stay present? And I was sharing this with Jeffrey earlier, and this has been my big passion because we just completed the Superconductors of Love Summit. And I'll put a link in the show notes for people if they want to be able to have access to all of those amazing talks. It's free. You can get that. But talking all about the Aries stuff that's going on and so on. But I don't think anyone talked about Eris and Chiron coming together in that talk, in those talks. So this is kind of taking it the next step. Uh, but the we called it this becoming superconductors of love because in a superconductive field, as that field is being created, everything gets more chaotic. All the electrons just start bouncing all over the place in total
Right.
chaos. And then a few of them start to come into coherence. And when there's enough, it's a very small percentage come into coherence, then everything comes into coherence. It just
Suddenly it's
boom, you have that
suddenly it just
superconducting
starts to
field.
shift. Yeah,
Yes. And then
the field
the
shifts and
lower vibrational energies can't penetrate that field because they either have to get uplifted into it or bypass it. And that you only need less than 1% of the population to come into that coherent field. So I think Eris is helping us
I
be
agree.
honoring of the chaos so we can come into greater coherence.
It's really difficult to experience it, but it is likely that this is exactly what we need to be experiencing. And again, to try to bring it back to the many threads that we could tug on to see where it goes, but the notion of let's bring it into personal for a moment instead of the whole United States, because then we kind of go,
For the
but
whole world.
yeah, it's a whole world because it's so we're talking about Chiron, this energy that has to do with the wound, the way we felt wounded or not accepted, or some piece of that. There's that, the whole big, broad idea of what the Chiron story suggests to us that helps us to achieve more freedom, more of our individual expression, and then to bring it back into how we structure our life and more broadly society. It's a Chiron journey, perhaps, to have been, some person outside society, like, the gay, lesbian, etc., and they had to go through this whole journey until now, at least in some realms, they're more accepted part of the society. That's the bringing Uranus back to Saturn. And I go off on a digression a little bit because what I want to suggest to people is where is your wound in your medicine? Where does your wound bringing your medicine? And if you were to invite the idea of Eris coming to sit at the table to break up all of your understanding around that, how might it propel you into a greater coherence with who you are and how that might influence everyone else around you, becoming, superconductors of the medicine that elevates the consciousness of the whole planet. Yeah. So that is a wild idea. I mean, that's going on, you know, Vision Quest or, whatever to have everything shaken up in order to be. I used Vision Quest, but we can imagine any kind of a situation that where out of the chaos, something new can arise. I I don't know that this exactly, well, actually this might be pertinent, but the what some people might not know is the Astronomical Society um, that decides what a new body gets named. The discoverers get to suggest different things, but then it goes through this kind of a vetting process. And they decided at the time at 2005 when they said, well, Pluto isn't a planet because it doesn't do this, this, and this, but it is a dwarf planet, and so is Eris. They made all these designations. They decided that everything out beyond um, Neptune, that those bodies had to be named something, some kind of an aspect from any story on the planet. This is how we arrived at Sedna and these others that has to do with the a creation story. So we're really that whole reordering also pushed us to draw from more than just the Western civilization idea of gods and goddesses. We're reaching out to others, even though Eris is Greek and probably had its correspondence before that, Egyptian, et cetera, et cetera. But that's how we're able to get Maki Maki. That's how we're able to get Haimea. That's how we're able to get all these other different energies. And we're introducing more of all of humanity's stories about creation, how their cultures experience that. I think that's kind of an exciting thing too.
That is exciting. Uh, and here we are, it's helping to expand consciousness and awareness. So expanding our consciousness out to the scatter field where Eris is. Chiron is in the asteroid belt between Saturn and Uranus, so it's not taking us out so far, how the two of them are coming together to work together in the sign of Aries together, to really um, be the ones that pioneer a whole new way of seeing and being in this reality. It's amazing. It's just like, wow. So I feel like we need to wrap this up, and we'll do more, we promise.
Yeah.
Because we just barely scratched the surface here. But what do you want to wrap up with here, Jeffrey?
I think I want to make one more suggestion because of the way you just named that with Chiron. And again, to try to draw intuitively from what actually happened in the physical solar system to how we are one with that, how we are one with the universe, and specifically our own solar system. But Chiron was also one of these icy bodies, but instead of it being pushed outward, it was pushed inward and then found its stable orbit between Uranus and Saturn. And Eris, well, Pluto was pushed out but became resonant with Neptune. And Eris is still out there in the scatter disk. So we have these different energies coming together, and maybe that's where we can kind of start to dream into the idea of what would it be like to have chaotic situation drawing from outside ourselves and our understanding, can bringing it to the Chiron, which is where's that inner wound that we know if we stop identifying with the wound, we can bring medicine and greater consciousness to humanity. How can those things work together? Reaching out in order to go deeper within.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. Yes.
So
Yes.
more to
So
come.
more to come, yes. So I did do a video on the Chiron Return, USA Chiron Return, that goes a little bit more into the story of Chiron and so on. I'll put that in the show notes if you haven't seen it, or if you have, you might want to revisit it. But now I wish I had said, because I said 2023 to 2025. Now I wish I had said 2026 because we have this additional information
Right.
about
Right.
it. Anyway, so stay tuned. We hope this was helpful and insightful, and is really inviting everyone to, as we join together, because as we join together, then we'll be creating an intentional field that will help all of this manifest more quickly for the benefit of the greater reality. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Bye.
Bye. You want to stop?